We begin in Venezuela, where Communication Minister has spoken regarding the group of National Guards who went to a military post with the intention of stealing weapons. Minister Jorge Rodriguez said that 51 weapons were taken belonging to the Venezuelan Armed Forces. Of the 51 arms that were stolen, 40 had been recovered. 11 are still in the hands of terrorists who participated in the haste.
Some of those involved in Monday's robbery belonging to the terrorist cell Voluntad Popular have confessed that the weapons were to be delivered to civilians belonging to the Voluntad Popular terrorist cell. This is in order to carry out violent acts, injuries, and death during the demonstrations to be held on January 23rd.
The minister also spoke about the house of beloved Chavista Robert Serra, which had been turned into a cultural house and library. The house, located in Caracas, was burned to the ground overnight. Lawmaker Robert Serra was murdered in October 2014. In other news from Venezuela, following the growing xenophobic fears in Ecuador, Foreign Minister has announced 3 flights will be allocated for Venezuelans to bring them back. Under the Return to the Homeland plan, the flights will leave Ecuador on Wednesday. Jorge Arreaza says this will facilitate the return of hundreds of Venezuelans who have expressed fear and the xenophobic campaign launched by Ecuador's government. Videos circulating on social media show a number of attacks targeting Venezuelan migrants in the northern city of Ibarra. In an historic show of solidarity, thousands of Ecuadorians marched in the capital Quito to protest against violence against women and xenophobia. Protesters marched through the city, raising slogans blaming the government of encouraging xenophobia and not doing enough to protect women. The protests were triggered in the country after a gang rape was reported in the capital city and a murder of a pregnant woman in the city of Ibarra. The marchers demand justice for both victims.
I think it was wrong, because machismo has no nationality and we can't justify our xenophobia with what happened on Saturday. We really need to eradicate it from below, starting with education. I think we need to put all of our focus on that, rather than saying that Venezuelans are at fault, because that's not the reality. It's machismo, it's the patriarchal system that unfolds each day.
I'm here to fight for the rights of women in Ecuador, and in particular, those who are close to me. They deserve all the same rights as men. I don't think there's any relation. I think the vast majority of Venezuelans are here to work, and the majority of Venezuelans are paying for the actions of the few who participated in any sort of delinquency.
Our correspondent Denise Herrera sent this report from the march.
Good afternoon. We are at La Tribuna de los Iris in Quito, where several women's organizations and citizens are gathering today against violence against women around the country. 2 cases of violence against women around the country shocked Ecuador during this week. One was a brutal rape in Quito, and the other a pregnant woman who was stabbed to death by her boyfriend, a Venezuelan citizen in Ibarra. In this context, President Lenin Moreno announced new measures to protect the country. One is the creation of units to control immigration legal status in the streets, in the workplace, and at the border. And also he announced the government might create a special permit to Venezuelans to enter the country. In the aftermath of these events, several attacks against Venezuelan people broke out, particularly in Ibarra. However, the Vice President of Ecuador, Otto Sonnenholner, reaffirmed and reiterated the Moreno's message, and also said that the government will ask to Venezuelans to permit to enter the country the criminal records. Also, social organizations of citizens of Venezuela citizens living here in Ecuador rejected this measure, and also they have called for the peace. Also, the Venezuela embassy in Ecuador says that they will activate a special plan to return to homeland plan for under these events. Also, the Venezuelan authorities in Venezuela rejected these measures, and also Venezuelan foreign minister said that this announcement has the Venezuelan foreign minister has accused the Ecuadorian government of fomenting xenophobia around the country. So we will stay here with the organization, and we will keep you posted with more information as soon as we know more details.
We thank Denise for that report. The president of Ecuador, Lenín Moreno, has once again taken to social media after widespread condemnation of a previous post on Twitter, which was criticized for inciting persecution of Venezuelans. In his latest tweet, President Moreno condemned xenophobia, but reaffirmed the creation of special brigades tasked with, quote, controlling the legal situation of Venezuelan migrants. However, activists feel the government is more concerned with creating a hostile environment for migrants than combating gender violence. Venezuelans in Ecuador are fearing for their lives since the government tightened controls on the immigrant community.
A lot of mothers didn't send their kids to school because they have received threats and derogatory content on their school chats. We are hearing complaints from all over the country.
The new government measures will create a bottleneck at the Colombian border with Ecuador, where they will not have access because of this process, which the national government and the foreign ministry know very well is impossible to get agilely like any other country will be able to do for its citizens.
The Bolivian President Evo Morales has addressed the nation over his government's achievement in the last 13 years. In a report called 13 Years Against 180 Years, Morales highlighted the country's advances in democracy and successes with political, economic, and social projects. According to official figures, in the last 13 years, Bolivia's economy grew by 5% each year, putting it in the first place for economic growth in Latin America. Our correspondent in Bolivia, Freddy Morales, brings us more.
President Evo Morales has provided a number of figures on how the country has changed in a positive way during the course of his 13 years in government. He elaborated on some information to help understand the Bolivian process, a structural process that the country has carried out. The school dropout rate, for example, now, with the use of a bonus, has been reduced by 8.5% to 1.5% over the course of these years. The government has implemented this bonus, which is paid at the end of each school year, as an incentive to people to enroll in school and to finish their education. It's a bonus which is received by all students for all school years and for all who take classes at public institutions. The result has been recognized by international organizations. Another important achievement spoken about by President Evo Morales is women's access to land. Before this administration, women did not have the right to hold a land title under their own name. Land could only be inherited by boys in the rural areas. This has changed, and now nearly 1 million campesino women have land titles for their properties.
In Matamoros, Mexico, tens of thousands of auto parts workers from 45 assembly plants are in week 2 of a massive strike. Dozens of workers have already been fired for helping organize the demonstration. They are demanding salary increases and bonuses. And while the action is disrupting automobile production, most of the media are not covering the strike. Speaking in Cuba, the head of the peace delegation for the Colombian National Liberation Army, Pablo Beltrán, said the delegation did not participate in the decision to attack the police school in Bogota.
Both parties arrived in Cuba 8 months ago. The government and the alien asked Cuba to host from the first day. When we arrived, the Cuban government said that talks should be exclusively about peace, nothing more. We've managed to stick to the requirements that the Cubans made to us. We're not involved, nor did they know of what happened with the attack.
Beltrán also said he's committed to search for a political solution to the internal conflict.
Despite all the difficulties inherent in the confrontation in Colombia, it's necessary to continue on the path of seeking a political solution to the conflict, to put an end to the internal armed conflict. Those who die are people's children, whichever the side they died on.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. Peruvian textile workers have marched in Lima to protest against the new labor reform proposed by the government. Textile workers' labor union fear that with the new reform, the workers will lose many rights, such as holidays or family funds. Hundreds of judges, lawyers, and trade unionists have protested in Sao Paulo against the government's plan to abolish labor courts. Earlier this month, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro said the labor courts provide excess rights for Brazilian workers. The move comes after the government abolished the Ministry of Labor. The trial of former Panamanian President Ricardo Martinelli will begin on March 12th. The 66-year-old has been accused of illegal wiretapping and embezzlement. Martinelli has been in precautionary custody since last June, after being extradited to Panama by the United States. He faces up to a 21-year prison sentence. A private plane carrying Argentinian football player Emiliano Sala disappeared over the English Channel Monday night. The 28-year-old had just signed a record-setting contract with Cardiff, a Premier League club. Lifeboats and helicopters are searching the area looking for the plane, but so far there is no trace of the missing aircraft. Sala was on board with another person and the pilot. A Mexican journalist has been killed in the state of Baja California, becoming the first reporter murdered in Mexico in 2019. 34-year-old Rafael Murua received death threats before he was found dead on Sunday night. Last November, he called out a local governor for abuse of power and later claimed to have received threats from the same official. Murua worked as a community radio station director in Santa Rosalia and reported on corruption, human rights, and gender issues. Also in Mexico, more than 40,000 people have disappeared in just 3 months. The figure has increased by nearly 3,000.
For a decade, Maria Cristina has searched for Dora Margarita. The number of people in Mexico officially registered as missing has exceeded 40,000, according to the National Search Commission. The commission offers renewed hope for victims' families.
We hope that there is progress now because I think families want to have a dignified burial for their loved ones and for them to be identified.
According to human rights defenders, the government of former President Enrique Peña Nieto failed to put systems in place to deal with this serious problem. That administration left the country without a state policy related to forced disappearances, so there was no system in place to deal with this national crisis.
We do have serious criminality here. There are lands controlled by organized criminal gangs and also by public institutions that are part of this organized crime network.
Since the start of the war on drug trafficking during the term of former President Felipe Calderón, there was an increase in the number of reported cases of forced disappearances in Mexico. In many instances, these reports were ignored by the relevant authorities.
Because of the state's inaction, it's the families of people who disappear who were forced to conduct their own investigations.
The government of Andrés Manuel López Obrador has called for the election of a new national search commissioner and for the formation of a truth commission to investigate the case of 43 students of Ayotzinapa who disappeared in September 2014.
The López Obrador-led administration is expected to bring a new model of governmental intervention and work alongside the victims' families and civil society.
Social organizations fear that the number of cases of disappearances could be even double, and may increase to 80,000 throughout the country.
More than 3,000 Hondurans and Salvadorians have crossed into Mexico in recent days. Guatemala's Minister of Interior, Enrique Denjard, estimates that almost 2,800 Hondurans and 250 Salvadorians have legally migrated into Mexican territory. Denjard says the Mexican government is handling the influx by installing 18 control points along their borders with those countries. The movie Roma by the Mexican film director Alfonso Cuarón is leading the nominations for the Oscars this year with 10 nominations. Roma becomes the first Latin American film with a nomination for the top prize, Best Movie. The movie tells the story of a housemaid in a middle-class Mexican family, and it has been widely acclaimed by the public and critics. Global leaders have gathered at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland to discuss solutions to global challenges. Hundreds of politicians kick off the annual meeting, including the leaders of Japan, Brazil, and Germany. Meanwhile, the United States, Britain, France, and Zimbabwe won't be attending. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has spoken about showing what he calls the new Brazil, which he says is safe for investments.
We want to show, via our special economy minister, that Brazil is taking measures so that the world reestablishes confidence in us, that our business will again flourish between Brazil and the world, without being guided by ideology. We will show that we are a country safe for investments, especially in the area of agribusiness, which is very important for us.
We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. The leaders of Russia and Japan meet in Moscow on Tuesday for talks over a dispute island chain. The dispute has long prevented agreement on a peace treaty to formally end World War II. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit marks the 25th time he and Russian President Vladimir Putin have met since 2013, a reflection of their efforts to build cooperation despite the territorial disagreement. The Palestinian Ministry of Health has issued a report that says the country is facing one of the biggest humanitarian crises in its history, caused by Israel's continuing repression and blockade of the Gaza Strip. Nayara Tardo brings us the details.
The Ministry of Health announced that 5 hospitals in Gaza will stop working because of a lack of fuel due to the Israeli blockade. 800 dialysis patients are in a serious situation. In addition, there are patients in intensive care who require operating medical equipment. Most of these patients are children. The constant attacks, blockades, and repression have led this area to suffer one of the greatest humanitarian crises in its history. Palestine recently denounced the recent Israeli measures against the Palestinian Refugee Agency, stating that such measures are a result. Because of the situation, the government of Tel Aviv decided to close schools in Jerusalem, and some 3,000 students could be left without studies because of Israel's decisions.
Members of parliament in Britain are presenting a series of amendments to try to stop a non-Brexit deal. On Monday, the Prime Minister Theresa May had to present Parliament with her revised plans for Britain's exit from the European Union. That was after her deal with the EU suffered a crushing defeat last week, but her new plan showed very little difference from the previous one.
Can I say to my right?
The United Nations say it expects global economic growth remain low, with sub-Saharan Africa being the most affected. According to global economic growth will remain steady at 3% this year and in 2020, slightly below a 3% rate in 2018. The report said employment was rising, but job quality remained low, and fear greater economic growth was needed in Africa to get people out of poverty. More than 700 million people live below the extreme poverty line, and half of them are in sub-Saharan Africa.
Is the answer to that question. It's very difficult in that world to make real clear predictions about where individual economies are likely to be heading over the next 12 to 24 months, and beyond that, the global economy more generally. All we would say, and the report emphasizes this, is that there are very serious threats to economic growth along several fronts: trade, debt, geopolitical, climatic.
Clashes erupted in the Democratic Republic of Congo on Monday between supporters of opposition candidate Martin Fayulu and motorcycle taxi drivers. In the capital, Kinshasa, Fayulu supporters accused the drivers of supporting the officially elected president, Felix Tshisekedi, disrupting a rally where Fayulu was expected to make an address. Fayulu claims he was cheated for an outright victory by an electoral coup. A former executive in South Africa says his oil company paid bribes for years to a minister who served under ex-president Jacob Zuma. Former chief executive officer of Bosasa contracting company Angelo Agrisi gave the bombshell testimony Monday to a judicial commission investigating allegations of corruption under Zuma. Agrisi told the commission that for 14 years, monthly bribes were paid to Moncaye. She is currently Environmental Affairs Minister and served as Zuma's Minister of Water and Sanitation between 2014 and 2018. Despite its history of xenophobic attacks on migrants, South Africa has signed a UN Global Pact compelling governments to safeguard migrant human rights. Our correspondent Matuba Mashali brings us the stories of migrants struggling to survive in the country.
In 2008, South Africa came under the spotlight for xenophobic attacks that spread throughout townships around the country. While the world looked on in horror, Bongani Maphosa had been living in South Africa since 1992. He was already integrated into society and survived unharmed.
It hurts me because I don't think that anyone would leave their country for no good reason. We all escaped poverty, and that's why we're here.
Bongani arrived just 2 years before the end of apartheid in South Africa. Many black people were undocumented, and he says that worked to his advantage because he got to vote in the first democratic election, even though he wasn't a citizen.
We were given small handbooks. Everyone old enough to vote was given one of those handbooks, even though we had no IDs to vote with, and I voted for Mandela.
Zimbabwe remains home for Bongani. He just came back from there just a few days ago and says the situation is quite desperate.
The protests are bad. There's either no fuel, or when it's there, it's too expensive. Children are not going to school. There are no teachers. Clinics have no doctors because they're on strike. We don't know when this will end.
After 28 years living in South Africa, he says his documents are still not in order for him to be a citizen or permanent resident. He still needs a work permit, but he says he's found a way to make a living.
I survive by transporting goods for fellow Zimbabweans from South Africa. Many of them know and always ask me for transport for a fee.
Many migrants, especially those undocumented ones like Bongani, end up starting their own businesses as informal traders. Others just end up as cheap labor for restaurants. This may not be ideal for all of them, but South Africa remains a land of opportunity even amid xenophobia that prevails. Matuba Mahlachi, Telesur, Mapopane, South Africa.
South Korea is launching its largest ever investigation into sexual abuse in sports as more accusations surface. The outcry was sparked in December when Olympic speed skating champion accused her former coach of sexually assaulting her when she was 17. He has already been convicted of physically assaulting the two-time Olympic champion. He was jailed for 10 months in September. A man is being investigated on suspicion of attempting to hijack a Russian plane and threatening violence. Here's more on that and stories from around the world.
An Aeroflot flight to Moscow made an emergency landing after a passenger on board demanded the flight be diverted to Afghanistan. The airport was cordoned off by the police, and the passenger eventually arrested. The plane reportedly had 69 passengers and 7 crew members on board when the incident occurred. 10 crew members have died, while 10 others are missing and feared dead in a fire that broke out on 2 ships transferring fuel in the Black Sea on Monday. The vessels have the same name as 2 Tanzania-flagged ships, the Maestro and Venice, which last year were included in a U.S. sanctions advisory as delivering fuel to Syria. 12 people were rescued from the burning vessel, but there was little hope for finding any more survivors. Tensions are rising at the border between Israel and Lebanon following the 2 countries' latest confrontations at the United Nations. Israel announced in December last year that its military destroyed a number of newly found Hezbollah cross-border tunnels. Early in January, Lebanon filed a complaint against Israel at the UN Security Council, accusing the latter of constructing an illegal fence in the disputed region along the 2 countries' border. However, locals seem to have already got used to the intense scenario.
The Lebanese army is patrolling nearby. This is our country, our land, so there is nothing to fear. Because we don't deliberately provoke conflict, so life is normal here.
And with this story, we come to the end of this news brief. This and many other stories you can find at our website at telsurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.